everything we knew about the VR wars, between Quest, Steam, PSVR 2, that's kind of now going to be completely changed because Meta is now officially out of the first party gaming business. And the reason this is so good is because it's not just Meta that have obviously struggled with this strategy of buying studios only to close them later on. PlayStation have shut, I think, 8 studios over the years that they bought in the past. And there's a clear trend now that buying studios to make games that not necessarily everyone wants. There obviously is some big hitters there that we've had in the past. But I think overall, their new strategy of investing in third-party games is a safer bet for everyone. So developers would bring a project potentially or start making a project, and Meta would say, or PlayStation would say, we love this game, can you bring it to our system? And then invest in the development of that game. And what that means is there's no real risk to the developer being shut down, which is something we keep seeing. Only yesterday, PlayStation shut down Bluepoint Studio, which for me was one of the best development teams out there. They did probably one of the best remakes in my life for Shadow of the Colossus. And to see them go is a real shame. And I think studio closures are one of the worst things that can ever happen because of legacy. You kind of know these developers' names, Twisted Pixel, Sanzuru, Armature Studio, Camouflage. Those names alone carry weight and they carry respect because you kind of like the games they've already made. And when you decimate a studio like that, that completely disappears. The talent behind it doesn't disappear, but the studios are gone. So then when it comes to like building hype for a next game, it can be quite hard. But when you think about the fact that Meta invested 150 million last year alone in third-party games, and the most popular titles on Quest are third-party games. Apparently 83% of us play third-party games. And I think sometimes we don't really know we're playing a third-party game. We don't necessarily think about it like that. If you think about some of the biggest ones, like Skydance Behemoth, Metro Awakening, Alien Rogue Incursion, they're all third-party games, They're potentially funded by Meta and PlayStation, but they're third-party games. So overall, I think this is a good move for Meta. We've spoken about it a number of times. We've heard the bad, we've had the bad section where we all thought like Meta Quest were dead. And then we had the sudden good news. Everyone felt good about it. They're like, wow, this is great. It means a more natural progression. But the fact that Meta have come out and actually made a statement about their future roadmap for Quest, I think in the long term is a good thing. And the other really, really good news is Horizon is being removed from the Quest store, not just sunsetted. This thing is going to be gone. Like there's going to be no trace of it in VR and it's going to be completely on mobile phones. And for me personally, this is why the two actually combine to make really good news, is that this means the storefront will be available for third-party developers. Again, which is something we used to have when Quest started, when it was all about games, then media apps. But over the last 2 years, or maybe more, it's just been all about Horizon shoved in our faces. And Horizon isn't any good in general. Otherwise, it would have been popular. It's just not very good. We've already got better social apps out there like Rec Room for the younger guys. We've got VR Chat for everyone else. And VR Chat, for me personally, I think is brilliant. You can play so many different games in there, from real games like Zelda, Ridge Racer, Daytona, Jet Set Radio. There's so much content in there. Doom. There's so much stuff going on in there. And Horizon could never have matched what's already existing. And that's the real problem. Even though a lot of the blame is on first party sales, they're looking at these first party games and thinking these games are making money. Let's think about Civilization 7, absolute flop. Star Wars Beyond Victory, absolute flop, because they're games that Meta wanted, but not necessarily the users wanted. And that's the difference. With third-party games, these developers go, right, we're going to put some money into this. There's already a big investment, a risk by these developers making this game. And then Meta and PlayStation and whoever else wants to invest in these games think, yeah, this is a good idea. And that's where better games come along, because there's a trifecta of people involved saying, yeah, this game's going to be good, as opposed to Meta saying, we need Star Wars, but we want it in mixed reality. And it just ends up being a pretty poor pod racing experience, which was the reason that most people were excited about it, but then it ended up being pretty lame. So 2 bits of massively good news there. Horizon is getting completely removed from VR. Great news. They are no longer going to be buying studios to make games that no one particularly wants. And I say that with a bit of a heavy heart, because if this would have happened earlier, we would never have got Batman. That game really shows what Quest 3 is capable of. It's a fantastic game. Asgard's Wrath 2, again, they're 2 games that might have never have happened if Meta wouldn't have bought those studios and invested in those games. Andrew Bosworth even said that VR is still growing, but it's growing a lot slower. So it's going to be interesting to see whether all these changes really make a massive difference. Personally, and a lot of people I know who love VR got into this because they just like good games. They're not really interested in too much mixed reality stuff. They're definitely not that interested in social apps, because if they would have used VR chat, which is available on Quest already. And as I said, with third-party games being the majority share of what everyone does on Quest, what's the point of them keep fighting this, shoving Horizon in everyone's faces? They might as well just go with what the community is telling them. You know, the investors are saying, this is what we like to do, and yet all you've done is push this other narrative into us that we didn't want anyway with Horizon. So yeah, the bottom line is the era of Meta making first-party games is pretty much over. When you think about third-party games, I think a lot of people think indie games. That isn't true. And just to list off a few that I know some of you must know that you would think of third-party games and not necessarily indie games: Job Simulator, Super Hot, Blade and Sorcery, Bone Lab, Boneworks, The Walking Dead Saints and Sinners, Thrill of the Fight, Walkabout Mini Golf, Pistol Whip, Ghost of Tabor. They are technically all third-party titles because they're not a studio owned by Meta. I actually think this is fantastic news for everyone, even though it might not seem it right now. I think in the future, this is the way it always had to be. We weren't going to survive with Horizon being at the forefront, and we weren't going to survive with Meta paying for games to be made that no one really wanted. And I really hope that the developers, after the decimation of those studios in regards to Meta, end up making their own studios. Overall, for the end user, this is a good thing in terms of the experience you're going to get on the Quest, which is going to be focused on stuff we want versus stuff we didn't want. And then it's going to be even better for third-party developers because finally they've got the store to themselves. You know, you can see new games versus Horizon. It basically means that exclusives are kind of dead and that more games will be coming to all systems. And that is a good thing. That's my take on it. As always, I look forward to reading your comments on this situation. And remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.